This is the last session of the healthcare track. So we had 5 tracks, 3 yesterday, 2 today. I know you were at a couple yesterday. So this is the last session of the healthcare track, but Dallas Startup Week continues. And it's a little bit different than in prior years. Anyone that's attended Dallas Startup Week, generally it was like sessions throughout the week. And it was also spread out throughout downtown Dallas and beyond. Every year was a little different, but and this year they had condensed the sessions into blocks. And so we have the block yesterday and the block today, and that's the way it is run this year. So Dallas Startup Week continues throughout the week, and we're searching for Adam Hall. Meanwhile, here he is. So he will join us in a second, and then we can... All right, I can see him. Can you hear us, Adam?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Okay, we're good. Okay, and now we see you too. It's the image has, I think the technical term is unfuzzed itself. Is that sounds about right? It was kind of fuzzy and it unfuzzed. Yeah. I think that's the word. Well, to our we'll get started here, and this is Healthcare and Startup Law, the 5th Dallas Startup Week's session of the healthcare track. To lead in, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Hubert Zaitchik. I run Health Law Catters here in Dallas, and we would like to thank the track sponsor, CU1 Innovation Lab, Blue Cross Blue Shield, here in Dallas for being a sponsor of the healthcare track. And then it's also my distinct pleasure to introduce 2 fantastic attorneys, both of whom have helped me a lot in my own life. Have helped a lot of the startups I've advised over the years, and are able to answer any questions you might have today here. Any questions, right? For you. So first up is Adam Hall, and there's a giveaway. Just right after Mr. Lipton's introduction, we'll have a giveaway. Okay. Yeah, I'll compose myself here. So Adam is co-chair of Polsinelli's Venture Capital and Emerging Growth Companies practice. Adam's practice focuses on representing high-growth businesses, primarily in software, hardware, Internet of Things, medtech, clean tech, life sciences, fintech, and other technology areas. He works with emerging companies throughout their life cycle, with particular focus on venture capital financings, strategic corporate relationships, and complex mergers and acquisitions. And Adam always gives that talk to our cohort here in Dallas, and as a partner at Polsinelli. Polsinelli is one of our sponsors, also helps us with our fund. So Adam, yeah, I think Adam does not give me educational credentials, but I do happen to know that he has them. Escapes me where you went for undergrad, but I do know that you went to law school at Washington and Lee, which is hard to forget for me because I just deposited my oldest daughter there 3 weeks ago. She's doing well, and it's a beautiful campus. So no wonder you went to law school there. That's like it's unfair to even. Beautiful, beautiful place. And now, in any case, the second introduction is Matt Lipton. Matt is currently a senior counsel with Gray Reed. He's got over 25 years of experience working with companies, individuals, and law firms. He's had this is of note. You should think about what that means. Had such a wide range of roles that it includes anything from CEO, COO, president, vice president of sales, director, board chairman, corporate secretary, general counsel in companies. He's also an entrepreneur. He's got family entrepreneurship genes as well, and is a healthcare and startup expert. He received his undergrad at Johns Hopkins and then his JD at SMU. And Matt Lipton is actually the sponsor of today's giveaway to us here. So I'm gonna have to go rogue here with the camera. So Matt, look what I have here. Do you recognize this item?
I do.
You do, okay. So I did not know that you had volunteered to, there's a beautiful cooler here. All right. And you've not missed it since May, apparently.
What was that?
This is an inside joke, but we borrowed Matt's. I'm not even sure how it happened here, but we borrowed Matt's cooler at MedVentures time frame, somewhere there, and it's it's been here the whole time. And asked Lindsay, what's going on? So Matt, at some point we're gonna have to get it back to you because you are the winner of today's prize, which was the giveaway of a cooler, a beautiful cooler. It even has a thing where you can measure fish on top. So, okay, this excitement. It's the last session. It had to break down. I kept my cool the whole time, and I had to come up with something really goofy. All right. Oh, there's some takers for your cooler, Matt. We might have to. I'd have to come up with some. All right. I have worked with both of you on a number of occasions, and the most important thing that I always say to startups is when you're looking to work with an attorney, it's a partnership. You really need to find the personal fit. You know, of course, the credentials need to be fantastic and they need to be qualified, but ultimately, you need to work with someone that you gel with. That means when you have conversations, you're not just in a series of misunderstandings. And I'm not saying that to imply that that's how it goes, but what I'm saying is it's a relationship, just like any team member in your startup, and it happens to be a very important one. And so we always tell our startups, you're going to be working with this person for a very long time. It's like you're taking them onto your team, even though they're outsourced, they're on retainer or something. And you need to feel very comfortable with them as if you were hiring them as a team member. So I think we have a pretty wide array of a lot of leeway in this session to talk about any kind of startup and healthcare related startup issues. So I don't know which one of the two of you might want to start with some either a specific angle that you have taken recently on when you work with a startup, or an example of some to-dos or not to-dos. And we're going to be scanning the chat here because I suspect that we will have people that have a variety of questions, and so we'll deal with those as they come. But as we get started, maybe each of you fill us in a little bit on your firms and your practice, anything I didn't say, and then we'll take it from there. So maybe Adam, you want to start?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Adam Hall, chair of the venture practice here at Polsinelli. Polsinelli is huge. You know, it's almost 1,000 attorneys, 23 offices, and largest healthcare practice in the country. We've now exhausted the things about my law firm that are interesting to anybody. It's a big giant law firm. That's about all there is to say about it. My practice is, because I run the venture practice for the firm nationally, that involves a lot of different things. Half of that is going to be early stage, rapid growth companies. Most of my practice is going to be on the fund side, on the VC fund side of deals, but we all do a little bit of both. And most of the work we do with an event like this or with accelerators, anything like that is we're not looking for clients in those situations. It's more about trying to help an ecosystem build faster. And Dallas is a good example of that, where there is all of the ingredient pieces for a sophisticated ecosystem are here, but the ecosystem hasn't quite matured to the place where we see just exits and exits and exits. And so we're trying to be more involved in events like this and with more of the accelerators around town to get more of the companies to do better early on, so that more of them get through Series A to Series B into an exit, and then it becomes this momentum process. And I mention that because as we're talking through all this stuff, it is really hard for us to make legal concepts not sound boring. I mean, these topics are tedious, but they are not academic. They are about money, and they're about controlling your company. And if you do this stuff right at the beginning that we'll probably be talking about, that doesn't require that you spend more money on people like me or like Matthew. It requires that you needed to do it. So a lot of this is just an institutional knowledge gap we're trying to fill, so that more early stage companies, particularly in the healthcare space, coming out of the DFW area, do better. So we have more opportunity to seek engagements from you when you go to exit, when you go to your later stage financings. So that's why we're here and what we're hoping to do.
Matt?
Thanks, Hubert. And that, Adam, I couldn't agree more. That's kind of directionally, I think, where we're all trying to head. I think my practice is a little different in that, as Hubert mentioned, I've been kind of a serial entrepreneur myself, and I tend to focus, to a certain extent at least, on earlier stage companies. So the folks that are in Health Wildcatters, for example, are a great set of folks for me to interact with, because I've lived the life that they're trying to live, and I understand a little bit about what they're going through. As far as my firm, it's more of a regional firm. We're probably 250 or so lawyers scattered throughout Texas, have a pretty good healthcare presence. And for us, that means predominantly anything outside of a hospital. But this is the kind of work that I really like to do. And I'm passionate about people who are passionate about what they're doing. And I think if you're not, there's no succeed in a startup environment. If you are and go all in, I'm 100% behind you. It's going to take that kind of stick-to-itiveness to make it happen. So
Okay.
I understand.
Yeah, I think, and Gray Reed, I should mention, is also a sponsor of Health Wildcatters. I think what matters is as you seek help in that realm. For me, one of the simplest things that I always tell my entrepreneurs is, when you go talk to a professional, and this translates into other areas as well, you should leave that meeting feeling better and have less questions than when you walked in. If you leave with more questions and more worries, then something went awry. And that does not mean that you didn't have some, potentially ugly things you found out or were informed about. But a good attorney and a good professional will put you at ease that they can help you sort these things out. I love the point about that Adam made a second ago. Set it up right at the beginning. A very simple example, for instance, is vesting agreements. And so maybe this is an area we can touch upon. This is Startup Week, so presumably, our audience is going to be composed of startups and people in the startup ecosystem. But maybe Adam, tell us a little bit about vesting, or maybe an example of where that became material when that was early.
No, happy to. And I think, Matthew and I were talking about this last week with you, Hubert, that what's interesting when we're talking about venture capital activity in the healthcare space is there's two sides of the legal issues for us. There are the legal issues that are idiosyncratic to a company that is specifically being developed with healthcare in mind, whether it's med device, life sciences, big data, whatever, predictive analytics, and whatever we're talking about, they're pieces of it that are specific to the healthcare regulatory scheme. And then the other side of it is that you're a startup. And just like every other startup, you're going to deal with a lot of same things that everybody else deals with. So setting those two things aside, and they're really different conversations, one of the things that is the same for every emerging growth company is the issue that Hubert's bringing up. And what we're talking about here is it's under this umbrella of founder risk. And I would say that from the venture fund side of things, We used to spend a lot of our time on diligence looking into the intellectual property ownership of the company, which is a big issue that we may want to get into. But we're spending, I'd say, almost an equal amount of time on founder risk concerns now. The current generation of entrepreneurs, we see a lot of them bail after Series A, trying to get to Series B when it gets really hard. And so we're a lot more concerned about how tight is that management group? Is it toxic? Is it effective? And one of the easiest ways to deal with that stuff ahead of time is to understand that the organizational documents you put into place when the company is formed, for lack of a better term, are a little bit like a prenup. What happens when you stop getting along? What happens if somebody needs to leave? And it is very unusual to see a founder team remain intact, exactly the same, all the way from startup to exit. It's very unusual. What usually happens along the way, and I know Matthew's dealt with this personally and seen it a lot too, is you see a founder group where one or more of them have life events happen. Either people stop getting along, someone has a kid, somebody has to move. There are things that happen that make it so someone leaves. Well, if there's three of us, Hubert, Matthew, and I form a company together, and we just, because we're all friends, we split it up a third, which by the way, is usually a bad idea, just to chop it evenly when that's not usually reflective of your value or contributions. But let's say we do that. 6 months later, I have a kid and I need to go get a job that pays, that has benefits and all that stuff. I got to leave. Well, absent us agreeing otherwise at the beginning in our organizational documents, when I leave, I keep my equity. All my stock stays with me. Well, now we have my zombie equity that was given to me for services I'm not providing anymore. And now Matthew and Hubert have to go out and keep building the company without my help, replace me and my skill set with somebody else. And they got to give something to that person, either salary or equity. And now when the venture fund comes in and looks in this and goes, why is a third of your cap table occupied by someone who isn't here, hasn't put any money in and doesn't provide any services? There is no way to yank that equity back if you didn't have a mechanism for that in your organizational documents up front. It is really easy to solve for this. It's founder vesting. If we form the company today and I leave within the first 2 years, I may walk away from everything. I just forfeit all my stock. If you can do the vesting schedule however you want, 4 years with monthly vesting with a 1 year cliff is pretty typical. But what we're talking about here is a situation where if you bail early, you don't get to take everything with you and own it in perpetuity. You got to earn it over time. I know, Matt, that you've seen this a bunch too, and it is toxic when this isn't dealt with and somebody leaves, and now you have this piece of the cap table that's occupied by someone producing no value. It's just resentment everywhere.
I actually couldn't agree more. I think the other thing I see a lot, Adam, is keeping their arms completely wrapped around the cap table. In other words, a lot of times I'll find someone's about to go do a round of capital raising. And there's a lot of, I don't really remember exactly what the deal was. Or I know we had an advisor agreement, but I don't have a copy of it. And I don't remember what it says. And, that kind of stuff will happen in early stage companies. But it's important, I think, from day one to be ready in a startup to go and do that raise. And that really requires things being buttoned up. And I think you hit it on the head on the vesting side. But I think globally, it's kind of let's make sure that all our ducks are in a row continually from day one. That helps with other things too. For example, I know in Hubert with Hell Wildcatters, typically you're going to want a Delaware entity to put your investment dollars in. A lot of folks here in Texas will just start with a standard Texas LLC, but that's not going to work for outside investors. Well, again, it makes all of our lives a lot simpler if we have everything buttoned up day one. We know exactly who owns what. We know exactly what kind of entity we're dealing with. And it makes our life from that point on just that much easier.
Yeah, and Matthew, one of the things that we talk about all the time when we're meeting with new companies is we want your tech to be bleeding edge disruptive. We want your business model to be the most futuristic thing you can come up with that's going to change the world. We want that. We want your company's organizational structure, its legal documents, the terms of its financing to be the most boring thing anyone has ever seen. We want it to be exactly the same as the last 6 deals. Not because it's easier for us, though it is, but the reason that we want it that way is because the funds care about transactional costs. They do not want to have to start from scratch in evaluating your docs. If they're going to put 500 grand in, they can't spend more than a couple $1,000s on their attorneys before the economics stop making sense. So if you want to make this easy for a VC fund, be a Delaware C Corp. use NVCA docs, do everything the same way that everyone else has done it, because it makes the process more efficient, easier, and it makes it look like you know what you're doing. You know, you need to have a stock option plan that makes sense, with vesting that makes sense, that looks like market. Ideally, if you can be uploaded onto Carta or CapShare or another web-based cap table program, even better. We are removing all these little friction points from the fundraising process by doing it the same way we've done every other deal before this. And that sounds kind of like cheating, but what we're really trying to do is make it so the only decision that the fund has to make is whether they think this management team is legit, whether your tech is interesting, whether your business model is interesting. If they start spending time having their lawyers dig into your docs, your valuation's already getting chipped away at, just by the fact that we have to look under your hood very closely. So that's an easy way that costs you nothing. Just do it the same way everyone else is doing it. Make your business be novel and interesting. Don't make the part that we're doing be interesting. It's also cheaper. We don't cost as much when you're boring.
Yeah, I've been preaching this for a long time, and obviously we are often put in this position when something is already kind of existing and we get involved, and it's often difficult to entangle. But that first time point when you join the accelerator or you get your first seed investors on board, there is a door of opportunity that opens up to say, hey, listen, they'll invest, but here's the things that you need to do to put them at ease. I think the best analogy I could come up with is you're trying to sell some sort of a really, really whiz-bang technology to someone, and they're really excited about it. And obviously they're applying a lot of scrutiny, and you're to that project, and you say, yeah, but I don't want to be paid in US dollars. It needs to be like a half a trade of something, and then some Bitcoin and some. Now everyone's focusing on what, instead just $2, please. Instead of doing, so this is plain vanilla is what you want. And so don't complicate things in the arena where it's just not exciting. And we preach it all the time. It's very hard when there are entrenched positions and everyone has a third, and now somebody would have to give something up and they don't agree. But maybe that first financing sometimes, of course this can blow it up, but the first financing can sometimes make that happen. And the accelerator is a small kind of a test financing almost, because it's lower due diligence that happens there.
Yeah, and then we transition pretty quickly into the side of things that is specific to the healthcare side of things, and from the investor side of things, coming in as investor counsel, the first thing we notice as a big red flag is when we see founders that don't really understand the regulatory scheme in which they're going to operate. And if you are going to do anything in healthcare, there's some healthcare laws that apply to you. I mean, it might be that you are exempt from them, but confirming the exemption and that the exemption can be maintained over time as your business model evolves becomes a thing. So no matter what you're doing, if it's in healthcare, you are living in a regulatory scheme that is not simple. It might be a state-by-state analysis on everything you do, but if you don't understand what the rules are, even if you're saying they don't apply, but if you don't understand the rules, we're going to start chopping at your valuation. Again, this is about money and about controlling your company. So if you don't understand that, because let's say you're a predictive analytics company and you are mining a massive amount of healthcare data. This is private healthcare information. HIPAA applies, PHI applies. The security of the way you transmit that data between the source of it and your algorithm is really important. Have you thought through that? Do you have corporate practice of medicine issues? Are you taking part of the fees from a doctor in a telemedicine setup? We've seen with companies that do remote testing where the fee for the testing included, if you tested positive for something, a consult with a doctor. But because that consult fee was incorporated in the original cost, you start having a corporate practice of medicine issue because you're siphoning off a little bit of money from someone who's providing professional medical advice. You're taking a little bit of their fee. There are ways around those things, but you have to make sure that they work. And when you don't, the problem is when we come in, when the fund comes in, especially at Series A or B, and looking at this seriously, and they're looking not just at your valuation, but at your unit economics, your velocity. They're really going to tear up your financials. If your business model and your financial projections are built on a false first principle because you don't really understand the world you're going to exist in, we're going to walk away. Even if the company had a great valuation and was kind of sexy and great tech, it doesn't work until you figure out how this is going to work in real time, how it's going to actually work when you put out in the market. So you need to know the regulatory scheme that you're into. And that unfortunately ends up involving lawyers, which is a bummer. I feel like every time someone talks to lawyers, it's like getting new tires for their car. Like there's nothing exciting about it. It just still works, right? And so that's no fun. But if you want to be successful all the way to the end, having the attorneys look at those issues or you really understanding them well yourself is necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's required. You have to at least have that.
So we've talked a little bit about vesting. Maybe let's pick an area. You mentioned corporate practice of medicine. Maybe Matt, let's pick an area that seems inconspicuous and you've seen startups coming to you with this great idea, and before you knew it, you were having to inform them that whatever they were planning was gonna end up in a jail cell. The fact about medicine is that a lot of things don't make sense on the legal side. A lot of things that are allowed in other areas are explicitly forbidden in healthcare. There are reasons for that go deep into the fact that the law does not want us to commingle commercial areas with the best outcomes for patients. So there are a lot of reasons for these things. Often they don't make sense on the surface, but they can have very, very real effects on startups. It could just be a non-starter for a startup, and heaven forbid they started. Now you're dealing with someone who's already broken the law, and you gotta course correct. So I don't know, Matt, if you have any specific examples or ideas around that area, and maybe let's name a couple of those laws that are important.
I think corporate practice is a great place to start, and I can give you a couple of real life.
Explain what that means.
So corporate practice of medicine is really a doctrine that says that lay folks and professional folks should be separate. So I should not be able to hire a physician, for example, and direct that doctor how to practice. That doctor needs to be autonomous, making independent decisions, and not just based purely on a business person who's not a licensed doctor telling him what to do. So it's not still the law everywhere. A lot of states have done away with it. Texas is still very strong in terms of corporate practice. A couple of cases I can think of in my practice, one was a telemedicine play. And it was interesting because, my clients were setting up the actual business. And so we were establishing a management company arrangement to be able to operate the business. And we could own the management company side. We can't own the practice. Well, there was a lot of confusion because they were coming from a non-corporate practice state, and they were trying to understand why we needed two entities and a management agreement, and why is it so complicated and so convoluted? I was like, well, it's the law in Texas. If you want to work in Texas, this is the way we can do it, and this is legal. Above and beyond this, we can't have direct control of a physician. Well, then on top of that, the physician went and set up a regular LLC for the practice entity, and we went off the rails again and had to take a couple steps back and say, no, this is the structure. The other example I would give that I thought was really interesting was someone that's more in kind of a quasi-retail space delivering kind of healthcare services, but the question really was, are they or aren't they practicing medicine? And so they were in straight retail, in strip malls, offering services that are more like a spa. But there was some question around some of those services to say, well, where's the line? At what point is that actually truly practicing medicine, such that they as business people can't own their own business anymore? And it got more complicated because they're wanting to do a franchise arrangement with other folks. So now it's not even just you risking yourself, you're taking other outside partners on saying, here's my built business model, come on board, pay me a franchise fee, and you can do the same thing. Well, took a full step back and realized that some of the services that they offered initially, fine, very spa-like, not practicing medicine, not a problem. The farther they pushed the envelope, the less comfortable we got, the more we had to push back and say, no, that's more of a med spa, that's a physician-related business. You can't do that on your own. So I think it's, again, it's healthcare is unique and different. And that's the one thing a lot of folks who haven't been in the space before will ask. Would I can do it in any other business? Yes, you can. You just can't do it in healthcare. And here's why. And then again, you're splitting hairs on some of this stuff because unfortunately it's not as black and white as you'd like for it to be a lot of the time. There's a lot of gray in healthcare. So we always want to be, if we can't be white, we want to be the lightest gray we can be.
Okay, well, that's point well taken, and that's an example. That brings up actually a question here we have from Raj. Are wellness applications regulated by healthcare-related laws? How do you draw a line between wellness and healthcare? I know that gets ninja really complicated, but maybe a couple of rules around that. Peter, Matt first, maybe.
Sure. Well, I mean, as I just mentioned, I mean, one would be that example I gave of the folks doing kind of spa plus services. Honestly, a lot of times it comes down to it's service line by service line. So it's a question of what kind of wellness services are you offering? Is it supplements? Is it kind of more involved treatment application? If you're actually going to be down to diagnosing and treating, then you're into the practice of medicine space, and that's a whole separate inquiry. So a lot depends on just the nature of your business and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think those are sometimes the things that confuse, and we and many others have a pretty basic set of rules around ventures that we invest in, and that is there has to be someone on board, either as part of the leadership team or on the advisory board, but some pretty strong healthcare knowledge and experience should be on board of that team. And the reason is not so much that we believe you can't figure it out. The reason is just simply that so we start off with a healthy appreciation for what is about to happen, and also you're gonna have to be able to answer those questions. And if you're coming up on one of those gray lines, then you need to be able to make a decision. And so other areas in healthcare that are simply different is a simple one is something called the Stark laws, which I'll let Adam explain, but I could make an ad for you, and then any business that comes through, I will, you cut me in on your profits. And you do that with televisions, with business. So what happens when we do that in healthcare, and how does that work, Adam?
Well, it's this is one of those issues that is similar to running into unregistered broker dealers and securities offerings. What we're talking about here is creating financial incentives for people to drive money in different directions in a way that then prejudices people's professional decision making. So we're setting up, when you set up a scenario where I have given a financial incentive for a physician to drive business toward my other medical practice, we are now running into a situation where their professional judgment's being affected by the fact that I'm paying them. So you have Stark and you have anti-kickback, and all of these things come together to limit the business models that you can do. But like with corporate practice of medicine, with this distinction between wellness and healthcare, these get really fact specific, and it's hard to provide a general position on it. You can Google Stark, you can Google anti-kickback and get kind of a Wikipedia version of what these things are. That should give you enough to tell you there's a red flag here I need to be looking for. But you aren't going to be able to make those decisions on your own, because some of them aren't going to be in the black letter law. They're going to have to do with rulings that have come out of government agencies. It's a little like a tax situation where, well, the tax code might say you can use 1202 in this way to make sure you get tax-free gains from a venture investment. But there's devil in the details in all of these things. So you can't just make a big assumption and go. It's one of the reasons I think, Hubert, to your point, that it's really important to put together, for medical related startups more than anything, a really good advisory board. Getting people on an advisory board where you're usually not paying them cash. They might have stock or phantom stock or something as an incentive to be there. but getting some adult supervision who have been through this once before, or are a practicing physician in the space that you're going to attack, having those people there limit the number of things you have to learn the hard way. And everything you learn the hard way gets more expensive. So I think someone was asking about reimbursing people on the board or compensating people on an advisory board. Is that question is?
Looks like it. I guess either of you want to give some kind of.
I mean, if we're talking about equity comp for people or people on your advisory board, when we're talking about an advisory board generally, there are a couple options. Your menu is pretty broad. You can give them stock options. These are not going to be employees, so they're not going to be ISOs. They're going to be non-qualified stock options, which are fine. You can do warrants, which are basically another version of a stock option. My favorite thing, though, is phantom stock. And I think it's something that we didn't used to see 10 years ago, but now we see a lot more of. And what we're talking about with like phantom stock is instead of giving someone actual equity in the company, you create a cash bonus plan, which is a lot cheaper to put together in the first place. And you give people a cash bonus upon the achievement of a certain event, an exit usually is what we're talking about, change of control. And that upon that event, they will get a cash bonus payment equivalent to what they would have gotten if those had been real shares. So economically, it's going to work similar, not exactly the same, but it's close to a stock option. But you don't have them on your cap table, and they have to be present to win. So if they leave the company before an exit, those awards usually terminate. So it's a nice way to have some golden handcuffs. But you don't need to know the value of the company at the time, which you do for stock options, which you do for profits interests. For phantom stock, you can give them out like Skittles. It's a lot easier. So it's something to consider with advisory boards. In terms of the amount that you would give out to somebody on the board, it is really hard to say what market is. But I would say anything that isn't on the low end of single digits is too much. 1, 2, 3, 4% is what we're usually looking at for an advisory board position, but it really depends on what they're doing. If you're putting someone on your advisory board who's really going to bring in a lot of capital or really going to provide a lot of technical advice, they're actually helping you develop IP. That's a different thing than someone who you're putting on there because their name on your website makes you look more credible, and you need someone to be able to call when you have a question about any of the things we're talking about, Stark, HIPAA, corporate practice and medicine. So if it's someone who is just some adult supervision and a name that's relevant, that's going to be a small piece. If they're genuinely involved in developing IP, you might have two different agreements. One is the general advisory board. You might also have a technical advisory board to help you develop IP, and that's going to be a different thing. At the risk of going on a little long here, I do want to mention, because it segues nicely, we're talking about the IP side, and this isn't specific to healthcare, but it's a huge issue. Almost every healthcare company we see has a lot of secret sauce. There is IP that really matters, whether it's predictive analytics and you have an algorithm that's great, whatever it is. Your IP is really important, just like it is everywhere. Med device, obviously. There's all these questions about, do you patent? Do you keep it a trade secret? Those are issues that we obviously can talk about. But the starting point, the gating item that I care about when I look at a company is, does the company own the IP in the first place? And the number of times we see a company that is really cool, but then we get into it and realize there was a kid that was helping develop the tech in the first 6 months, and then who moved back to Singapore. And there is no document that says the company owns that IP. He never signed anything that assigned the IP, whatever he created, over to the company. It's not work for hire. Well, I got to cut your valuation way down now because there's risk. If this company becomes worth $100 million, $200 million, that kid's coming back, or he's probably coming back. So, yeah, I mean, I would. So, at the very least, we have to adjust for the risk on that issue. So, you want to have proprietary information and invention assignment agreements from every founder, from everybody who touches your tech, everything, so that when we look at it later, going through diligence and the financing, we can check off those boxes like a banker. We don't have to dig in very far. We go, cool, they've got the docs we'd like to see. We're good. Let's move on to evaluating the tech itself. If there are questions about the ownership of that tech, valuation getting cut down, 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 down. So getting this stuff right on the nerdy side of things means you're going to be more likely to get it right on the money side of things.
Thank you, Adam. So first of all, the comeback kid lives in Singapore. We know that now. It's always where he is. So now we know where he is hiding, and he'll show up if you do really well. I know we got a couple of questions on IP here, but I want to give Matt the chance to opine. Anything you want to add to that?
I saw the question about academic founders, and I'm happy to address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Yeah,
take things in order. I mean, I do think that's an important question. I know it's something you deal with all the time, which is, for a lot of folks, either coming out of academia or maybe out of the business world, who are now making their foray into, being an entrepreneur. Yeah, it's a very different world. And the advice I would give is talk to people like the folks that you've got in this room. Hubert in particular, this is his bread and butter. And you need someone who understands how to stand something up out of whole cloth. The world is entirely different than academia. And actually, my first big foray into entrepreneurship involved pulling some patents out of Southwestern that were in my dad's lab to build a company around. And it was sure. So I'd say it's important to understand the difference between where you're coming from and the environment you're headed to, and get that advice early on, especially about setting the entity up the right way, making sure you have the IP. To Adam's point, what does that look like? What am I bringing with me? And then from that point on, you can stand it up. But I think it's get advice early and get it often from folks that have done this before. And it's really critically important, I think, especially for folks that have either lived in the corporate world their whole lives, or if they're coming out of academia.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on another thing that happens on the academic side very often is there are two separate things. One is developing IP, another one is starting a company. There are very few people that can do both well. And the assumption out of academia usually is, well, if I'm smart enough to write a patent and be a professor at a university, I got that. All I need to do is buy a few books and read up, and I'll be smart enough to win at that too. And the answer is, oh, I don't have my button here. Nope. The answer is nope. And the reason is that business success is not contingent on an IQ or figuring out technical details. It is a complete different set of skills that anyone can acquire, but I've found very often that it seldomly exists in the same persons because it's a different set of skills. So being open to that side of commercialization and talking about deals and business is often hard for academic founders. So I encourage them to bring on business advisors from a trusted resource, which is the other thing early on. Maybe your university has some mentors. Of course, we're in the business of bringing on people we trust. So because you're going to have that, and it's not about IQ. It's going to be about having the experience both on the healthcare side, like we mentioned earlier, on a business side now, to stand up your venture and not make any silly mistakes. Adam, I know you wanted to say something.
Well, no,
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. We're bumping up against our deadlines, but we still have a couple more questions here that maybe we can give some quick answers. One around Andrew asking on patents and filing in multiple countries. The primary to that is, yeah, you can, and it's a financial decision and a strategic decision you have to make. So I don't know who of you wants to dig in a little.
Neither Matthew nor I are patent attorneys, so but we both touch IP all the time. This is a question you want to run by somebody who it's the only thing they do is patent work, and ideally the only thing they do is patent work, not just in healthcare, but in a very narrow space. If you have a company that's surrounding a med device that you're developing, you want a patent attorney who only does med device. Like those are really specialized skills and should be respected like that, and I don't have them. But what I can tell you is that yes, you can file in multiple countries. There are treaty compacts that allow you to file in one place and have it then trickle down to a lot of countries who are signatories to that treaty. But as Hubert was saying, and he's right, it is an economic decision, but it's also a strategic one. There are reasons you might want it in certain places and not in others. And it needs to be part of a discussion, a larger discussion about how are you protecting your intellectual property generally. I've mentioned predictive analytics companies a couple times just because it's on my mind right now, but it's a good example where patenting is probably not the right thing to do. If you have tech that doesn't directly touch third parties, and predictive analytics is a good example, you get data, you run it through your black box with your tech, and then you produce data as a result. That technology is probably not a good idea to patent. One, you're disclosing it to the world, and it's not that hard to get around an algorithm patent. Two, by the time you actually get the patent approved, you've probably moved on 3 versions past that original one. So protecting it doesn't matter. And in a lot of ways, if you really do it right as a trade secret, it's more protected anyway. But a trade secret isn't something you just say, we're keeping it confidential, therefore it's a trade secret. You need to have a trade secret regime that's not expensive to put in place, but it was a way in which you set rules internally about who can access this technology, how you're controlling that access, and then you need to follow it. And if you do that, you should have robust protection around your intellectual property. So you want to have that conversation with someone who knows what they're doing, who's smarter than me, and who can really give you good guidance on it. But it isn't just a cost thing or an availability thing. It should be part of a larger conversation about our strategic intellectual property portfolio, its value. And it used to be that the VC funds wanted to see a big list of patents inside the data room when they came in to look at the target. We don't really feel that way anymore. That might be the case if you have a med device that is going to get exposed to third parties, but it also might be the situation where we go, we don't want you to patent it yet because we don't want the world to see how you're doing your secret sauce. So yeah, again, that's not that helpful. You need to talk to people who are smarter than me about this.
Okay, so that was a little bit, yeah. So on strategy and I'll add to that too. For many years, companies, which is, I mean, it does get to a point where you have to understand what it's going to cost you, what's going to get you, whether it's worth protecting that slice of the planet or not. And in that regard, a lot of people have simply not filed in China because that was just perceived as a faster way to give them your IP than if they find out and have to dig through the filings here. Others have decided that recently things have changed and China is taking IP more seriously. I think the proof is going to be in the pudding on that. But on algorithms, things you don't need to disclose, absolutely, I couldn't have said it better. I look very carefully at how you do that, and I'll protect both of these because they're never said they're IP lawyers, but since I'm a layperson, I can say these things better. Is the best approaches that I've seen for startups is to create a comprehensive IP strategy that encloses all factors of your invention in your business. So that will potentially include patents, but it will also involve trade secrets. It will involve trademarks. It will involve a strategy around the globe of where you want to go and where you don't want to go. And then also you can work with your IP attorney around a whole bunch of other things you can do that are providing a whole suite of patents so that you start getting around, so nobody can get around your one patent. Okay, so very often I see a startup come up with one patent and here it is. And then you're going to say, well, there's 3 other ways to do this. And so a good patent attorney or team of attorneys will help you create a strategy that creates a moat around your invention. And the goal there is to make it when somebody thinks about knocking your invention off, is to make it really, really hard or very, very expensive for them to do, so that they'd rather enter into discussions with you around maybe acquiring or licensing your IP, as opposed to just start running into issues with the variety. So there is a very fascinating field, and when you see a good startup that's really thought this through, with their whole portfolio of assets that they have assembled, you realize that they're really creating value, not just one patent or one invention, but a real fence around your business that protects it in a credible way. And on a business side, I'll say this all day long, this creates true value. And I think on the expense side, I want to say something that's important for startups to hear, and that is when you invest in resources like professionals that help you set up your business, your healthcare strategy, your IP strategy, it can cost you a lot of money, that's for sure. But you're dealing with the right professionals that are truly vetted and can help you create those strategies. You are creating value. You are spending money, but you're creating value. An investor will look at these things and say, you know what? Those are the IP attorneys. I think we're good. Or this is the firm that set this up, or this individual set this up. I trust them. That's going to be a check mark there. And that's what you're buying. And that is a huge value. And it's very often overlooked because everyone's just looking at, needless to say, it's expensive to hire attorneys, accountants, you name it. And I always say, those are very valuable assets to you and in your business decisions. I think we've come up 12:22. We've got 3 more minutes. So last, I can on the IP attorneys, you can find obviously both Adam and Matt are in large firms, Greer Reed, Polsinelli, that have fantastic attorneys that specialize in IP. But there are a lot of good options. Dallas is blessed with a really great law firms and specialists. So SC, I don't know how to give you a better answer than that. But last word, maybe start with Matt. Anything you want to add? We got a minute for you and a minute for Adam to close us out here.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one thing we haven't touched a lot on is just what a wild ride this year has been. I know that's true for all of us, but I think it's especially true in the startup world. My experience has been, especially around March, when folks were trying to raise money, things got really interesting. But the good news is, like a lot of markets, it's very resilient. And so people have found creative ways. I mean, like, I don't think a year ago we would have conceived of having Startup Week this way, but here we are. And it's actually worked out really well. So I think to me, that's also kind of an important feature for anyone in the startup space or an entrepreneur is to be resilient and to be resourceful and to really make the best use of both the resources you have in this market and then the people that are available to help you. As I said, when we started, I'm a big fan of startups generally. I mean, I get fascinated talking to people. I love to hear their stories, what they're passionate about. Why are you doing what you're doing? And there's a lot of folks like me out in the world. And so I'd say, lean on us wherever we can help because it's important. The world needs entrepreneurs. The world needs new concepts, new ideas. And it's a tough road at times. But there's a lot of folks out there that can help you and a lot of resources that are available to you. So by all means, reach out. We'll do whatever we can.
Adam?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the takeaway for me from a lot of what's happened over the last year is affirmation of stuff that we were seeing before this, but that the importance of entrepreneurs owning what they're building. And this is to say that we want to see you drink your own Kool-Aid. We want you to think this is going to change the world. If you don't believe that what you're doing is going to be the greatest, biggest thing ever, then we shouldn't be putting our money into what you're doing because this is too hard. It's too difficult to take a company from nothing with nothing in it to building something that has an exit. That is a really challenging thing along the way. And for most CEOs, the entrepreneur CEOs, that is the loneliest and hardest job you will ever have. And so one of the things I would say about using professional service providers, not just lawyers, but accountants, everybody, find people who you feel like you can lean on a little bit on the psychology side of things. You're going to need people you can chat with when you can't talk to people on your board, when you can't talk to your co-execs because you're too scared. But own your company, and that means not just the things that are good, but own all of the warts on the company too. When somebody asks you about something that's problematic with your business model, don't dodge the question. Take it on head on and say, yeah, that's a problem. We haven't figured out how to solve that problem. The unit economics are messed up because of it. We will overcome that, and our product is awesome, and it won't matter. But yeah, we agree. We have to figure that out, and we need 6 more months runway to do that. Whatever it is, know your financials, know your regulatory scheme, know your people, know who's good at what, and don't hide from any of it. Own the company, own what you're good at, own what you're bad at, and don't apologize.
Well said. I will close us out with this. It's difficult to get better people on a talk about startup healthcare law than these two here. I trust them both. And one of the things that you should look for when you look for an attorney is what I said at the beginning: is find a person that you can really talk truly to. The more they know about you, it's a relationship, it's a long-term relationship. Don't try to get someone for free for an hour and then you can't afford the rest of the relationship. Build something. We always tell our startup, build something with people that you can grow with. But like the people, feel confident enough to deal with people that you personally can gel with as well. And then look for firms that are doing the extra mile. I mean, these two are not getting billed. Can't bill this hour to anyone. They're giving off their time. So you'll find law firms involved in accelerators like ours. You'll find them doing other things in the community. I mean, look for the firms where that's important to their DNA, where it's important to them. And I think that's a very good start as well. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Adam. And as well as everyone else that's listening, especially everyone that's also asked questions to enrich the session. This is the last session of the healthcare track, so you're going to have to switch to a different track. There are some great ones out there. Thanks for making Startup Week a virtual success to everyone involved here, because to Matt's point, I think a year ago we would have all said, "Oh, I don't want to be part of that." And now we're here, and we're actually, this is pretty good. It's working quite well. So thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing you in other sessions. Also, there's a networking feature. It's quite cool. You push the button, you'll be randomly matched with someone, and you will be face to face for 3 minutes, 30 seconds. And just like at the water cooler, meet somebody cool. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now to close myself out for Startup Week for the day. Hope to see you somewhere in a random session. Again, thanks everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.